Hello, welcome to our midweek stream live at lunch. Thank you for coming along and watching this as we deep dive into the question of what are two ways to live. That might seem pretty simplistic to you. There might be many ways that we could live, but sometimes it helps to look at two opposite ideas, and really it could help us in figuring out, which way are we going, which way are we headed, and where are we going to end up. So asked this question in our Facebook page, and a couple of responses have come in. Someone said that two ways to live: attitude versus gratitude. I like that one, it rhymes. Another one, peace versus conflict. Also a good one. So maybe you could drop in the comments your ideas of two ways to live. But today we're going to carry on from last week. If you're watching last week, we looked at the story of Hagar and Ishmael. And this week, we're jumping forward into the New Testament and seeing a Bible passage that looks back and uses that story as an illustration of two different ways to live, which are in fact opposite and in opposition to each other. So let's look at that and then explain the relevance for our lives today. So drop a comment or question in below, and be happy to answer that as well. Galatians 4. Tell me, you who want to live under the law, do you know what the law actually says? The scriptures say that Abraham had two sons, one from his slave wife and one from his freeborn wife. The son of the slave wife was born in a human attempt to bring about the fulfillment of God's promise. We talked about that a bit last week. Our human attempt to try and make things happen when we don't see what God's promised us coming about. But the son of the freeborn wife was born as God's own fulfillment of his promise. I love that we can see the freeborn, the free way of life. Life lived in freedom comes from God's fulfillment of his promise. The way that God acts on our behalf brings about the best way of life. When we try and make things happen ourselves, it ends up enslaving us. Let's continue. These two women serve as an illustration of God's two covenants, old and new. The first woman, Hagar, represents Mount Sinai, where people received the law that enslaved them. They couldn't live up to the standard that God had set. And now Jerusalem is just like Mount Sinai in Arabia, because she and her children live in slavery to the law. But the other woman, Sarah, represents the heavenly Jerusalem. She is the free woman, and she is our mother. As Isaiah said, the prophet, "Rejoice, O childless woman, you who never give birth, have never given birth. Break into a shout, joyful shout, you who have never been in labor. For the desolate woman now has more children than the woman who lives with her husband. And you, dear brothers and sisters, are children of the promise, just like Isaac. But you are now being persecuted by those who want you to keep the law, just as Ishmael, the child born by human effort, persecuted Isaac, the child born by the power of the Spirit." So here we have a group of Christians, the Apostle Paul's writing to, and they're being persecuted, he says. They're being told, you need to live up to these standards. You need to follow these rules. Paul's saying, no, that's not the way. Live a life by the power of the Spirit, a life of freedom. But what do the scriptures say about that? Get rid of the slave and her son, for the son of the slave woman will not share the inheritance with the free woman's son. So, dear brothers and sisters, we are not children of the slave woman. We are the children of the free woman. So sometimes we can feel like our faith is about following these rules, we've got to go to church. We've got to read our Bible. We've got to pray so many times a day. We've got to give this amount. We've got to do this, go that. And if you're not a Christian, you can feel like life is about following a list of requirements. And we can become sort of enslaved to having to measure up to a certain standard. It could be a standard someone has set for us, or it could be, and often is, our own standard that we keep for ourselves. We've got to do so much each day, so much each week for ourselves to feel content, happy with who we are and what we've done. We've got to achieve. It's a never-ending cycle that we can be enslaved to. But this passage points to a different way of life, a life of following the Spirit's leading. Now, how can we think of this? Maybe we could think of a diet. If you are on a diet, that is something that I would say is enslaving. Don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat that. Whereas, what's the other side of it? The comparison, I think, would be where your meals are prepared for you. Meals that will meet your needs. And you don't have to worry about what you're going to eat. You just get on with the tasks you've been given, and like, I guess if you're in the army, you just serve the food that you need. Serve the food that will meet your requirements. And so I guess that's a life of being free from having to worry about what you eat. So I'd say that's a little bit of a comparison, but another way to look at it, if you're working for a boss and, got some things you've got to do to sort of keep that job, keep in the good books with your boss. But for the boss's children, they're going to be the boss's children. They're going to have a relationship with that man or woman, their father or mother, regardless of really if they do all the right things or not. They've got a life of freedom and relationship and joy, hopefully, because of their position. And that is really, I think, what this passage is getting at, that we can live a life of freedom and joy when we understand that God's new agreement with us is not based on rule keeping and living up to a standard we have to keep. It's an agreement based on belief, faith in a relationship, that we have a position now because of what Jesus has done, a position where we are right with God. We don't have to live up to the standard that we might imagine is there. But as we sort of work with God and follow his ways, those standards will find a way of being met in Jesus, and we'll be working towards that, sort of like the food analogy. We'll be getting what we need as we just focus on that relationship rather than trying to work out our own diet. The human effort of trying to achieve a right relationship with God versus God's way through Jesus in making us right. So, two ways of living and two very different outcomes. Where are we? Often we might find ourselves in the middle somewhere, but which direction are we headed? Get rid of that side of us that feels that we have to live up to a standard to be okay. Let's be moving towards that relationship where there's freedom and where there's joy. So please share your comments below. Love to respond. Thank you for joining us again, and